My name is Isabel Torres, and for more than 2 decades, I believed I was living the life I was meant to have. I had been married to Daniel for 25 years, and together we raised our son Leo in Charlotte, North Carolina. Ours was a marriage that looked steady from the outside. Friends often told me we were the perfect pair. I managed our home and our finances, while Daniel built a reputation as a charming financial advisor. We laughed at dinner parties, traveled occasionally, and celebrated milestones the way families are supposed to. But appearances have a way of deceiving. The illusion shattered on the night of Leo's law school graduation party. We had reserved a private room at a beautiful restaurant. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, a moment when all of our sacrifices as parents were validated. The room was filled with professors, friends, and family. Glasses clinked, conversations flowed, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to feel proud of the life we had built. Then everything stopped. I will never forget the shift in the air. The way the laughter died, the forks stilled, the collective gasp that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. In an instant, Daniel had taken what should have been a night of pride and turned it into the stage for his exit. He announced to everyone that he was leaving me, that after 25 years he had found someone new. I felt the stares on my skin, dozens of eyes waiting for me to collapse, to cry, to explode. My son's joy dissolved in front of me, replaced by confusion and shame. But I didn't give them the performance they expected. I remained composed, steady, and unbroken. I stood from my chair, gathered myself, and left the room. As I walked away, I realized something important. Daniel thought he was in control. He thought he had blindsided me with a betrayal no one could recover from. What he didn't know was that I had been waiting for this moment. For months I had seen the cracks forming. For months I had been preparing. He believed he was starting a new life that night. In reality, I was the one stepping into mine. Part 2. The Trail of Secrets. The unraveling of my marriage had not begun with that public scene. It had started quietly long before, in the small inconsistencies that most people would overlook. A hotel charge in Charleston that Daniel dismissed as a client meeting. A perfume receipt tucked into his wallet for a scent I had never worn. Handbags and jewelry I never received, but that appeared on our credit card statements. Each item seemed harmless enough on its own, but together, they formed a pattern too sharp to ignore. The real fracture revealed itself when Daniel's work habits shifted. He began staying later at the office, claiming endless meetings and unexpected emergencies. His phone, once left casually on the counter, became an extension of his hand, always locked, always shielded. The distance between us widened, and my instincts told me the truth long before I had proof. One night, when the unease was too strong to ignore, I sat down at the computer and logged into our joint accounts. What I saw made my stomach twist. Transfers, at first small, then larger, and then undeniable, were being funneled into an unfamiliar account. 200 here, 500 there, then thousands at a time. The amounts grew bolder, as if his confidence in my blindness grew with them. But I was not blind. I began to keep records. Screenshots, copies, notes in a small leather notebook that I kept hidden in my office drawer. I traced the money as if I were following breadcrumbs through a dark forest, each transfer leading me deeper into a truth I no longer wanted to deny. And then, by chance, I found confirmation I could not unsee. Daniel left his phone unattended one evening, and a notification lit up the screen. It was a message from someone named Marissa. My hands trembled as I opened the thread, but the words were clear enough. Plans for weekends together, declarations of love, whispered promises of a shared future. There was even mention of the night he intended to reveal everything. After our son's graduation celebration, he believed I would never see it coming. That was the moment I stopped thinking of myself as a wife trying to salvage a broken marriage. Instead, I became a strategist preparing for the battle of my life. I went to the attic and retrieved the prenuptial agreement Daniel had insisted upon years ago. At the time, I had agreed without hesitation because I loved him and because I had more family money than he did. The irony nearly made me laugh when I found the clause that mattered most. Infidelity nullified the sharing of assets. If either partner strayed, the betrayed would walk away with nearly everything. Daniel had forgotten. I had not. 3 months before Leo's graduation, I hired a lawyer named Samuel Ortiz. Together we built my case: bank statements, receipts, text messages, hotel invoices, even photographs. Every piece of evidence told the story Daniel thought he had hidden. He imagined his big reveal at the party would be his triumph. I planned for it to be his undoing. That was why I walked into the restaurant calm and composed. That was why I had placed the sealed envelope beside his plate. By the time he announced his betrayal, I had already beaten him at his own game. Part 3: The envelope. When I walked out of the restaurant, I didn't turn back. Behind me, I could feel the weight of dozens of stares, the low hum of whispers, the collective shock of people who had just witnessed my husband detonate our marriage in front of them. But I refused to let their pity follow me. The air outside was thick and humid, pressing against my skin, yet it felt strangely freeing. Every step toward my car was measured, deliberate, like I was walking into a new life I had already chosen. I knew Daniel wouldn't let me leave without a scene. He came rushing after me, his shoes pounding against the pavement, the envelope clutched in his hand. I didn't need to hear his words. I could read the desperation on his face, the disbelief that I had dared to act before he could finish his grand performance. He had expected me to crumble, to plead, to become the tragic character in the drama he had staged. Instead, I was steady, silent, and already gone. I slid into the driver's seat and left him behind, standing on the curb with his illusions unraveling around him. When I arrived home, the quiet of the house greeted me like a familiar companion. Everything was in its place: the family photos lining the hallway, the antique dining table polished and ready for the next holiday gathering, the worn leather sofa where Leo once sprawled with his schoolbooks. But nothing felt the same. The house had become a stage set, each object a prop from a life I no longer recognized as mine. I went upstairs and opened our closet. Hidden behind neat rows of shirts and jackets were 2 suitcases, already packed. The sight made me smile bitterly. He had prepared for his escape long before that night, as if he could quietly vanish and step into a new life without consequence. His predictability was almost comical. My phone buzzed endlessly. Friends offering concern, family demanding answers, even Daniel's sister reaching out in shock. I ignored them all except for Leo. To him, I sent a short message of reassurance, urging him to hold on to his night of celebration. I had no intention of letting his father's betrayal eclipse his success. Hours later, Daniel returned. The roar of his car in the driveway, the slam of the front door, the sharpness of his footsteps, none of it startled me. I was in the living room, laptop open, reviewing the evidence I had so carefully gathered. When he stormed in, red-faced and clutching the crumpled envelope, I closed the computer and simply looked at him. He raged, his voice filling the room, but I didn't need to absorb a single word. I had already stripped him of his power. The prenup he had once demanded, the account transfers he thought were invisible, the text messages he believed would remain private, all of it was now a fortress around me and a prison around him. As his anger boiled over, I sat in silence, knowing he had finally realized the truth. His carefully constructed plan had collapsed, and the price of his betrayal would be higher than he had ever imagined. Part 4. The cracks in his new life. In the days that followed, the fallout began exactly as I had expected. Daniel had always thrived on image, on being seen as successful and admired. His reputation mattered more to him than truth, and now it was unraveling faster than he could contain it. The sealed envelope had not only held divorce papers, but also the documentation of his hidden accounts, the transfers I had traced, the evidence of his affair. By the time he tried to gather his defenses, the accounts were already frozen. He had access only to his personal funds, and those were far less than the image he had been projecting to Marissa. I watched from a distance as the cracks formed in their relationship. Marissa had believed she was stepping into a glamorous new life with a man of wealth and influence. She had been promised beachfront properties, luxury cars, endless indulgence. Instead, she found a man cornered by legal filings, unable to deliver on his promises. The illusion he had built for her collapsed as quickly as it had for me, and her discontent was obvious. At home, I moved with purpose. I began reclaiming spaces that had long been defined by his presence. The dining table no longer symbolized shared meals but became a place where I spread documents, organized files, and planned my next steps. The master bedroom, once a stage for pretending, transformed into a space of solitude where I could finally breathe without the weight of deception pressing against my chest. Leo returned to me with questions, confusion, and anger at his father. I reassured him as best I could, reminding him that none of this was his fault, that his achievements were still his own. But I could not erase the bitterness he felt toward Daniel. A son who had worked tirelessly to earn his degree had discovered his father was siphoning money, while telling him the family needed to tighten its belt. That betrayal cut him as deeply as it had cut me. Daniel tried to reach me many times, storming into the house demanding explanations, insisting that I was being unreasonable. He no longer looked like the man who had stood so confidently in that restaurant. His face was drawn, his eyes bloodshot, his voice stripped of its power. He spoke of ruined futures, of unfairness, of history between us, but I listened without response. His history was no longer mine to carry. What unsettled him most was the realization that the very contract he had demanded decades ago, the prenuptial agreement meant to protect him, now worked against him. He had signed his own downfall long before he ever met Marissa. The fidelity clause, still binding, left me with the strength of the law behind me. He, on the other hand, stood exposed, his betrayal recorded, his finances documented, his credibility gone. Even his sister turned against him. She had been the first to notice his closeness with Marissa months earlier, and when she confronted him and heard his empty reassurances, she eventually came to me. Her support became another reminder to him that the circle he had relied on for admiration was no longer loyal. As the days turned into weeks, his carefully staged plan unraveled piece by piece. The property he promised Marissa slipped through his fingers. The luxury items he had ordered were canceled. Friends who once sang his praises began to distance themselves, wary of being caught in the fallout. I didn't have to fight with rage or noise. Silence and preparation had already done the work for me. I remained calm, steady, and resolute, while Daniel watched the life he thought he controlled dissolve before his eyes. For the first time in years, I realized the power of my stillness. He had underestimated me, and now he was paying the price. Part 5. The end of one life and the start of another. The divorce proceedings unfolded with a precision I had carefully engineered. On the morning of the preliminary hearing, I walked into the courthouse with calm resolve. Daniel arrived looking weary and unprepared, accompanied by a lawyer too inexperienced to untangle the mess he had created. The judge reviewed the prenuptial agreement, examined the evidence, and upheld everything I had known she would. The accounts remained frozen. The house stayed in my possession. The fidelity clause stood firm. Daniel's confidence drained from him with each passing moment. What he once believed was his safety net became the very rope that bound him. The man who had once demanded the contract to protect himself was undone by his own foresight, never imagining that I would one day be the one holding it firmly in my hands. When the final hearing came, it happened to fall on what would have been our 26th wedding anniversary. By then, Marissa was already gone, having slipped quietly out of his life when the promises of wealth and glamour evaporated. Friends he once entertained with elaborate stories of success no longer answered his calls. The illusion of Daniel Torres, respected advisor and devoted husband, had collapsed. What remained was a man left with little more than his personal belongings, and the remnants of a business that faltered without my support. For me, the end of the marriage became the beginning of something I had long delayed. With the financial security I had always safeguarded, I opened a consultancy firm dedicated to helping women navigate life transitions, divorces, career changes, widowhood. Clients came quickly, many through word of mouth, women searching for clarity and strength in the face of uncertainty. Each meeting reminded me that what I had endured was not just betrayal but also education, one I could now use to guide others. Leo stood by me throughout it all. Though hurt by his father, he found pride in my resilience. He often told me that I had taught him more about law and justice than any classroom ever could. His support became the anchor I had once thought Daniel provided. Months later, as I sat in my new office, surrounded by files, clients, and the hum of a life rebuilt, I reflected on the path that had brought me there. Daniel's betrayal had once felt like the end of everything I knew, but it had become the doorway to a self I had long buried. I was no longer defined as his wife or only as Leo's mother. I was Isabel, independent, capable, and unafraid. The envelope I had placed on his plate that night had not just ended a marriage. It had opened a future I had denied myself for too long. Behind the weight of betrayal, I discovered the strength of reinvention. And in reclaiming my freedom, I finally reclaimed myself.